The room fell into the kind of silence that only follows the word time. Latex gloves snapped off, a toe tag rustled, the chart closed with a soft, unmistakable click. He was gone, declared dead after relentless efforts. Yet as the printer coughed out the death certificate, something in the air felt wrong, like the room itself was holding its breath. I stood near the monitor we had already silenced, hearing only the hum of fluorescent lights. His skin looked waxen, still, undeniably cold. But a faint warmth lingered beneath the sternum, a whisper under the ribs. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Residual heat, a trick of grief. Then a nurse frowned, as if catching a word no one had spoken. Paper slid from the tray, official proof that life had ended. The attending signed. The ink shone wet. We do this rarely but decisively, final, careful, sober. Still, I couldn't ignore the puzzle pieces scattered at my feet. A stubborn capillary refill, a pulse oximeter that refused to zero, and the strangest sensation that the room's gravity had shifted. Someone joked, dark humor, the shield of the exhausted, about miracles happening after midnight. No one laughed. A distant elevator dinged. I leaned closer, measuring the absence the way you measure a storm about to break. His lips were parted as if finishing a sentence. The certificate rustled again, that small, papery thunder of verdicts we don't reverse. A whisper of air brushed my knuckles. Reflex, I thought. Leftover currents. Yet my eyes refused to look away. A thread of color crept where none should. And then, from the stillness labeled dead, I felt the shape of a syllable forming. What happened next would challenge everything medicine thought it knew. We record deaths with ritual precision because certainty matters. In this case, the certainty shattered. Our protagonist, Lucas Amaral, 51, a history teacher who loved late jazz and early mornings, arrived after a catastrophic collapse. Despite full advanced life support, his heart would not return. He was pronounced, documented, and prepared. And then the impossible started whispering through the ordinary. The setting was a night shift ICU, dim corridors, vigilant monitors, coffee cooling beside unread notes. Family waited 2 floors down, rehearsing the language of goodbyes. The medical team moved with practiced grace, charting, comforting, packing away tools that save most and fail some. Lucas seemed beyond saving. What followed would turn protocol into question marks and grief into stunned hope. There is a documented phenomenon in resuscitation medicine called auto-resuscitation, the Lazarus phenomenon, where circulation returns after attempts stop. It is rare, unsettling, and still not fully understood. Gas trapping, delayed drug circulation, and chest recoil mechanics are proposed culprits. We don't expect it, and we certainly don't expect words. But medicine's margins are not empty. They're crowded with edge cases that change textbooks. Lucas was an edge case. His chart listed hypertension, a stubborn cough he ignored, and a recent flu that wouldn't quit. He taught his students about timelines, how a single minute can redraw an era. Ours was about to be redrawn by a breath that shouldn't have existed and a voice that should have been forever silent. Before we dive deeper into this shocking case, make sure to subscribe, hit like, and comment what city and country you're watching from, so you never miss the next shocking story, because as we follow the trail of vital signs that returned after a signed declaration, we'll step through science, fear, and a moment that felt less like medicine and more like a miracle. Lucas Amaral's story began not in the ICU, but weeks earlier, in the middle of his classroom. Students noticed him clutching the edge of his desk, chalk trembling between his fingers. He joked about needing more coffee, but the color draining from his cheeks told another story. That moment, fleeting yet chilling, was the first hint that something beneath his calm exterior was unraveling. None of them could know that this was not simply fatigue, but the beginning of collapse. At home, Andrea, his wife, recalled nights when Lucas awoke breathless, gasping as if surfacing from drowning. He dismissed it as stress. "Teachers live on nerves," he would say with a half smile. But Andrea knew better. She watched him grip his chest, the pain sharp enough to halt conversation. He promised to see a doctor, but always postponed. Each skipped appointment tightened the invisible clock ticking inside his body, winding toward a silence that should have been permanent. When Lucas finally collapsed in the hallway of his apartment, paramedics arrived within minutes. His vital signs were weak, oxygen saturation plummeting, pulse irregular, blood pressure collapsing. The ECG displayed chaotic waves, an orchestra of misfiring electricity. "We may be losing him," one medic muttered. Every compression, every injection was a plea against inevitability. Neighbors stood at their doors, frozen, watching science battle silence. Each shock from the defibrillator lit the narrow hallway like lightning striking indoors. At the hospital, the admitting physician read the first reports. Myocardial infarction suspected, complicated by severe arrhythmia. Lucas's medical history revealed untreated hypertension and a viral infection weeks before, now suspected to have inflamed his heart muscle. Myocarditis can smolder unseen, doctors explained, then erupt without warning. Lucas had ignored the whispers of illness until they roared into catastrophe. Even as machines tried to stabilize him, his body refused to answer. The crash team prepared for the worst. His vital signs dwindled into fragments. Oxygen levels resisted correction, slipping lower. Nurses exchanged glances, clinical but human, hearts pounding behind their professionalism. The attending announced time of arrest. Chest compressions hammered rhythmically, sweat dripping onto sterile sheets. Adrenaline syringes emptied, epinephrine surged through veins that barely carried blood. A flatline cut across the monitor, bright and final. For many, that line meant closure. Yet the case file would not end here. Instead, it was only sharpening its edge. After 40 minutes, the physician pronounced him dead. The declaration was solemn, routine, devastating. A nurse prepared the documentation, filling the page with neat handwriting that carved permanence into ink. A body tag was placed, the kind that ends questions. Family members were notified with trembling voices. Andrea collapsed in the waiting area, sobbing into her hands. The medical team consoled themselves with protocol. Everything possible was done. Yet somewhere deep inside, unease lingered like an echo. What puzzled them were the inconsistencies. A faint capillary refill in his fingertips, color returning in places where it shouldn't. A pulse oximeter still flashing occasional readings, refusing to vanish into zeros. Machines are fallible, doctors reminded themselves, but instincts told another story. Even in death, Lucas seemed reluctant to surrender. One nurse whispered, "It feels like he's holding on." They dismissed it as emotional exhaustion, unaware that science itself was about to be challenged. As the paperwork finalized, small irregularities multiplied. A subtle tremor in his chest wall. A flicker of electrical activity dismissed as artifact. The team hesitated, then shook their heads. False positives, they said. The declaration remained in force. Yet anyone looking closely would have seen the clues assembling like pieces of a forbidden puzzle. Lucas's body was not following the script of finality. It was staging something unexpected, something that would make headlines if anyone dared believe. The attending placed the chart on the counter, finalizing the signature. The words, "Time of Death," glowed under fluorescent lights. Silence claimed the room. And then, a nurse leaned in, eyes widening as she felt the faintest movement against her gloved hand. Reflex, she thought. Impossible, she told herself. But her breath caught, her pulse racing. Something was stirring where nothing should. The doctors thought they had seen everything. They were wrong. The silence after his death did not last long. Monitors that had been switched to standby began flickering again, as if refusing to obey. A faint waveform reappeared, jagged but undeniable. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances, torn between protocol and instinct. Could circulation truly return after 40 minutes of nothing? Some called it artifact, a glitch in wires. Yet deep down, every heartbeat of the staff carried the same question. Was Lucas still here, somewhere between life and death? The attending physician ordered immediate reassessment. Compressions restarted, reluctantly at first, then with renewed urgency. To their shock, Lucas's pupils constricted faintly under penlight. That small reflex shattered certainty. Impossible, someone whispered. Yet his oxygen saturation climbed from flatline to a faint but measurable number. The death certificate lay signed on the counter, mocking them with its premature finality. Science demanded explanation, but the room demanded action. No one dared call it revival, not yet. Andrea was rushed back upstairs, confusion etched into her face. Just minutes earlier, she had been told her husband was gone. Now she watched doctors fight again, disbelief colliding with hope. Tears streamed freely as she pressed her hands against the ICU glass, unable to breathe. "Don't play with me," she murmured, half to God, half to the staff. The uncertainty was crueler than loss, twisting grief into something stranger, the possibility of resurrection. Medically, the complications were staggering. Prolonged cardiac arrest often leaves catastrophic brain injury. Even if circulation returned, survival with consciousness was improbable. Yet Lucas's body defied expectations. Faint respirations, sporadic movement, and a stubborn pulse surfacing in irregular bursts. The team speculated about delayed drug effects, trapped air pressures, even electrical aftershocks in the myocardium. None of it fully explained a man attempting to re-enter life after being formally released from it. He was rewriting physiology in real time. The second wave of collapse came swiftly. His fragile rhythm deteriorated into ventricular fibrillation, chaotic and lethal. Another round of shocks was delivered, jolting his body violently. The monitors screamed alarm tones, each one a countdown to oblivion. Doctors shouted orders, lidocaine, magnesium, repeat compressions. Andrea covered her ears, unable to bear the metallic chorus of machines and human desperation. For a moment, it seemed cruel to fight again, and yet Lucas's body kept offering fragments of resistance. By dawn, his organs showed signs of severe stress. Kidneys struggled, lungs stiffened, lactic acid spiked. The medical notes became a catalogue of failing systems. Still, the spark of life refused to extinguish. "We are chasing shadows," one resident muttered, exhausted. But shadows sometimes conceal light. Each minor recovery fueled another attempt, another round of desperate interventions. The team walked a tightrope between futility and miracle, their exhaustion blending into a strange form of reverence. A neurologist was called. The expectation was grim: minimal brain activity, irreversible damage. Yet the EEG revealed scattered bursts of cortical function. Not silence, but flickers, like a stormy sky hiding stars. "This is not compatible with death," the neurologist admitted quietly. His words spread through the ICU like wildfire. What was once a tragic closure had become an unfolding riddle. The declaration of death now seemed less like a final chapter and more like a misprint. Every hour brought new contradictions. Blood gases worsened, yet reflexes returned. Kidneys faltered, yet pupils tracked light. He was deteriorating and awakening simultaneously, as though trapped in a paradox of biology. Staff whispered about the Lazarus phenomenon, but none had witnessed it this vividly. Medicine could not categorize him, too alive to be dead, too broken to be alive. Each moment widened the gap between science and faith, leaving everyone unsettled, waiting for the next revelation. Near sunrise, the attending leaned against the counter, staring at the chart already stamped "Time of Death." He knew revising it would trigger legal storms, investigations, explanations that no textbook offered. But he also knew what his eyes saw. Lucas breathing shallowly, faint words caught in his throat. The ICU air trembled with anticipation. They had reversed death once. Could they hold him here? The doctors thought the worst was behind them. They were wrong. The ICU had become a stage where certainty unraveled. Hours passed in suspended disbelief, every monitor beep a reminder that Lucas refused to follow medical logic. Nurses spoke in hushed voices, as if any loud sound might scare life away again. The death certificate still sat folded on the counter, a ghost of finality haunting every glance. And yet, his chest continued its fragile rise and fall. Fragile but undeniable. Something unknown was orchestrating his return. The turning point arrived not with drama, but with a subtle clue. A resident noticed Lucas's fingertips twitching in rhythm with his respirations. Small, deliberate, almost purposeful. Reflexes, they said. But then, his lips moved faintly, shaping syllables. The words were inaudible, but unmistakable in form. Speech. Gasps rippled through the room. Dead men do not try to speak. Medicine had an explanation for reflexes, but not for language clawing its way back from silence. The neurologist ordered another EEG, expecting noise and artifact. Instead, the screen lit with bursts of organized cortical activity. Patterns resembling conscious attempts at communication spread across the tracing like sparks on paper. "This isn't random," he whispered. The staff stared in disbelief. A man pronounced dead was now showing signs of structured brain function. The contradiction was stunning, threatening to topple not just protocol, but the very trust we place in biological boundaries. Andrea was brought inside, against usual policy. She grasped Lucas's hand, tears dripping onto his skin. "Lucas, it's me," she whispered. To everyone's astonishment, his eyelids fluttered. His lips formed another sound, hoarse, fractured, but distinct. "Here," Andrea gasped, collapsing into sobs. Staff froze, their training colliding with awe. The official death declaration was still stamped in ink, yet her husband had just answered her call. The ICU had become a room where fate misfired. Doctors scrambled to stabilize his fragile state. Ventilation was adjusted, medications rebalanced, fluids titrated. Every act carried new weight. He was not simply a body, but a voice fighting through layers of silence. Yet complications multiplied. Blood pressure spiked dangerously, arrhythmias returned, oxygenation wavered. Each intervention felt like trying to thread a needle in a storm. Still, hope outweighed despair. "If he can speak, he can fight," Andrea insisted, her eyes blazing with defiance. Medical debates erupted. Some argued this was transient electrical activity, a cruel illusion of consciousness. Others insisted the evidence was too deliberate, too human. The Lazarus phenomenon could not explain structured speech. Auto-resuscitation did not account for memory, for recognition, for language. What if Lucas's case was something else entirely? A hidden mechanism of delayed revival, a pathway medicine had not yet mapped? Theories collided, but one truth held. The patient was rewriting textbooks. As the debate raged, Lucas continued to move toward awareness. He squeezed Andrea's hand with faint intent. He mouthed fragments of words, names, questions, unfinished thoughts. Every flicker sent chills through the room. Machines warned of instability, yet his will pressed forward. The staff alternated between resuscitation maneuvers and stunned observation, caught between science and mystery. "He is pulling himself back," one nurse whispered. No one dared call it recovery. It felt more like defiance of fate. The crucial discovery came with a review of his labs. A rare combination of myocarditis, medication timing, and trapped air in his lungs had delayed drug circulation long enough to mimic death. But even this failed to explain his attempts at speech. The medical explanation was partial, incomplete, like a puzzle with missing corners. Lucas's case was no longer about pathology alone. It was about the fragile frontier where science falters and humanity trembles. The attending closed his notes, staring at Lucas as though seeing something sacred. "We may be witnessing the impossible," he admitted quietly. Andrea pressed her forehead to the glass, whispering prayers that blended with the hiss of machines. Lucas's lips moved once more, shaping words too faint to catch. Every ear strained, hearts pounding, the world holding its breath. The doctors thought his return had reached its peak. They were wrong. Silence broke with a single sentence. "We revoke the declaration." The attending's voice trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of precedent. Legal would demand explanations later. Biology demanded action now. Andrea nodded through tears, as if a gate had swung open. I felt the room pivot from mourning to war. If Lucas could claw his way back to speech, we could meet him halfway. The question was how? What bridge could carry a heart this fragile across the abyss? The cardiologist whispered the unthinkable. VA ECMO, a heart-lung bypass, a mechanical lifeline for patients too unstable to sustain their own circulation. It was high risk, resource intense, and, after a pronouncement, controversial. "If we do this, we own the consequences," the attending warned. "If we don't," I answered, "we own the silence." Consent was obtained at Andrea's trembling insistence. The team moved with a choreography that only desperation perfects. Tubing, cannulas, sterile packs, every second a choice between courage and regret. Technically, the path was narrow. Ultrasound mapped femoral vessels like a night scout tracing rivers on a dim map. Heparin dripped, trays clicked, monitors screamed. "Cannula," the surgeon said, steady as stone. We threaded metal into life's plumbing, fingers gentle, minds ruthless. A hiss, a surge, a bloom of crimson in clear tubing, then the pump engaged, spinning like a captured storm. Lucas's blood, now oxygenated by machine, returned with measured insistence, a synthetic tide answering a human plea. Ethics hovered like a second attending. "He was declared," a resident murmured. "And now he speaks," the neurologist countered. Law lagged behind physiology, and physiology lagged behind Lucas's refusal to stop. On ECMO, his organs could rest, his myocardium could rethink its fractured rhythm, and his lungs could borrow time. None of it promised consciousness, let alone memory. But promise wasn't the point. Possibility was. The room leaned into it, the way sailors lean into wind they cannot see. Andrea approached, eyes red but fierce. "Lucas," she whispered, "we're not done." His lids trembled. The pump hummed a low industrial lullaby. A nurse adjusted sedation, enough to protect, not enough to erase. I took his hand, surprised by the stubborn warmth. "Stay with us," I said. "Borrow our machines if you have to." His fingers twitched. Once, twice, as if ticking yes. If this moment shocked you, type the word "shocked" in the comments. Some stories ask for witnesses. Complications struck like hail. A clot threatened the circuit. Anticoagulation titration became a razor's dance. Blood pressure flirted with collapse, then rebounded under vasopressors. The ventilator sighed against stiff lungs. Settings were tuned with the delicacy of a watchmaker. Labs trickled in, lactate easing, pH tilting toward normal, kidneys considering cooperation. "He's buying time," the intensivist said, almost reverent. We watched the monitor trace a hesitant alliance between machine and man, every waveform a fragile handshake. Then the whisper returned. "Here." His mouth formed, breath snagging on the consonant. It came like a signal from a far lighthouse blinking through rain. The EEG echoed with organized bursts, not fireworks, but lighthouses too, steady, intentional. "He hears you," the neurologist told Andrea. She pressed her forehead to his, tears dampening the tape. "I'm here," she answered, syllable for syllable. In that exchange, medicine felt less like a system and more like a vow we were keeping. Science, ever sober, framed a theory. Myocarditis plus air-trapping delayed drug delivery. Chest recoil and late venous return conspired to restart circulation. ECMO stabilized the aftermath long enough for neurons to renegotiate. But the theory had seams. It could not fully account for language finding a path through injury and sedation. "There's a mechanism we're missing," the attending admitted. or a threshold we don't yet understand. The room agreed quietly. Mystery stood beside physiology, unembarrassed. We tapered sedation, fraction by fraction. Lucas's gaze steadied, drifting, then fixing. His lips parted again. This time sound came with it, frayed but unmistakable. "Don't let me go." The pump thrummed, monitors chorused, and every soul in the room forgot to breathe. We had made the shocking decision. Now, the decision was speaking back. Could ECMO carry him all the way home, or only to the shoreline of consciousness? The doctors thought the hardest choice was behind them. They were wrong. Morning light slipped into the ICU through half-closed blinds, illuminating a scene that felt more resurrection chamber than hospital room. Machines hummed, but the rhythm of Lucas's chest had grown steadier, independent. Nurses adjusted ventilator settings downward, cautiously testing if his lungs would carry him without mechanical crutches. Each exhalation was a fragile triumph, each heartbeat a whispered defiance against ink already dried on a death certificate. The staff who had pronounced him gone now witnessed the unthinkable. The weaning process was treacherous. Oxygen saturation fluctuated, alarms chimed unpredictably, and every adjustment carried the tension of tightrope walking without a net. Andrea never left his side, her whispers a constant stream of encouragement. "You've crossed oceans of silence, love. One more step." Slowly, Lucas's body began answering her. Muscles trembled but moved, eyes fluttered but focused. Staff exchanged looks heavy with awe. Every return of function felt like retrieving treasure from a shipwreck thought lost forever. Day by day, fragments of awareness knitted themselves together. Lucas recognized faces, mouthed names, and even managed short sentences. His first coherent phrase stunned everyone. "I heard you." Andrea collapsed into tears, clutching his hand. Doctors leaned closer, not only to confirm lucidity, but to glimpse the boundary he had crossed. What he remembered was partial, dreamlike, but undeniably conscious. Medicine had categories for return of circulation, but not for memory bridging declared death and fragile revival. Physiologically, recovery hinged on delicate balance. ECMO support was tapered, then discontinued as Lucas's heart found strength to pump independently. Medications were reduced, kidneys began clearing toxins, brain scans showed surprising preservation. Experts suggested his case could transform clinical protocols, reconsidering observation times after failed resuscitations, refining guidelines for auto-resuscitation, and deepening study into myocarditis-related arrests. But within the hospital walls, science was secondary to wonder. Everyone whispered the same word, reverent and shaken: miracle. Lucas himself wrestled with the paradox. He remembered darkness, yet not absence. He recalled voices as if carried through water, Andrea's words piercing the void like guiding stars. His account unsettled the staff, not because it was irrational, but because it was consistent. Patients in cardiac arrest occasionally describe awareness, but never after official death declarations. Lucas had turned a medical rarity into living testimony. He wasn't just surviving, he was narrating survival from both sides of silence. Andrea became his anchor through rehabilitation. She held flashcards as he retrained memory, steadied him during first steps, and documented every milestone. For her, the miracle was not only in his revival, but in rediscovering him daily. Lucas's smile, once routine, now carried gravity, each curve of his lips proof that time borrowed could still be given back. "You were gone," Andrea whispered one evening. "And yet, here you are," Lucas answered with a faint laugh. "I refused the ending." Medical journals requested details, ethics boards convened, and debates raged. Should declarations of death be extended? Should ECMO become standard after prolonged arrest? Experts argued mechanisms, probabilities, and costs. But Lucas's case could not be reduced to charts. He embodied the messy collision of science and mystery, proof that certainty in medicine remains provisional. "We treat data," the attending admitted, "but we live with stories." Lucas's story would ripple outward, unsettling boundaries between what is possible and what is believed. When Lucas finally walked out of the hospital, weak but alive, staff lined the hall. Applause filled the corridor, a rare fracture in clinical reserve. Andrea walked beside him, their hands interlaced. Cameras captured the moment for study, but for Lucas, it was simply a homecoming from a place few return. He paused, looked back at the ICU doors and whispered, "Thank you for not letting go." The silence that followed was sacred, almost liturgical. Recovery did not erase scars. Lucas would live with medications, monitoring, and caution. Yet he carried something more powerful: testimony. His survival taught science, humility, and gave his family a second life. To the medical team, he was both patient and paradox. And to millions who would one day hear his story, he was a reminder that even when medicine draws a final line, life sometimes redraws it. They thought his chapter had closed. They were wrong. Lucas's case became more than a chart, more than a debate. It became a mirror reflecting the fragile edge between certainty and mystery. Doctors who signed his death certificate later stood at his bedside, listening to his voice. Andrea, who had rehearsed goodbye, instead welcomed him home. And Lucas himself, who journeyed into silence, returned with fragments of memory that science still struggles to explain. His story is both medical anomaly and human miracle. From a scientific lens, his revival challenged resuscitation protocols, sparked conversations about auto-resuscitation, and reminded medicine that humility must walk beside knowledge. From a human lens, it revealed the immeasurable power of presence. Andrea's voice, the team's persistence, and Lucas's own defiance stitched together an impossible recovery. His survival is more than physiology. It is testimony that sometimes life rewrites endings we thought permanent. What do you think really saved this patient's life? Science or fate? Share your thoughts below, and don't go anywhere, because in our next story you'll meet a patient whose laughter nearly became deadly.